otherwise it will return false. So now if we go over to register.php, this makes a lot of sense. We could even include equals 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 true, and that will match this returned value to true, and if it does, then the email has already been registered. So have a careful look at this function, the query if you don't quite understand it, and then why we return true and false, and you'll know that, or you'll understand why we use this. So let's go ahead and test this in our browser. Now let's refresh the page first of all. I'm going to register like I normally would, but with the same email address that already exists in the database. I'm going to type my name and a password. I'm going to click register, and it says that email has already been registered. Now what's going to happen if we choose something like bob@phpacademy.org, we choose a new name, well, it doesn't really matter, and a password, and click register, nothing happens, meaning we don't have any errors. So we've successfully now checked whether a user exists in the database with the same email address. Okay, so that's the validation out of the way. Now what we actually need to do is register our user. So we're going to create or fill in the function user register here, and that's going to actually take in the email, name and password, and then that's going to register our user. So the first thing we want to do is sanitize email and name. The reason we don't need to sanitize password is because we're going to be converting it to an MD5 hash, and therefore eliminating any chance of SQL injection. So the first thing we want to do is create a new variable email, and that's going to be MySQL real escape string and then email. So it's taking in this value, putting it in here, and using the MySQL real escape string function, much like we did down here. We're going to do the same to the name, so let's just copy and paste this line to make life easier for ourselves, and change that to name and change that to name. So we've sanitized these two fields. Now what we need to do is run the query to actually register the user. So it's a lot simpler than you might think. We just need to run one query, and that is insert into, and we're again inserting it into users because that's our users table. We're inserting values, and that's one. Let's check how many values we've got actually. Let's go to users. We have got 1, 2, 3, 4. So we've got the user ID, which is auto incremental. We don't need to supply a number, and then we have the 3 fields that we've taken from our user. So this can remain blank here, and then we say something, something, and something. So the name is, the email is quite simple. You just type in email there, and then name, and the password is a bit different. I'm going to end the string and start the new string, and in the middle concatenate the password. So password here. Now the reason I've done this is I'm going to be using the MD5 function around it to encrypt the password. So I'm going to say MD5, and I'm just going to surround the password variable in parentheses. So we've ended the string here and just concatenated that on. If you've looked at concatenation before, you'll understand how it works and why we do it. So now that we've done that, we actually need to return the user ID in order to log them in straight away. And if this doesn't make sense now, it will make sense a bit later when we actually register our user and automatically log them in. So I'm going to say return MySQL insert ID. And what this function will do is it will grab the last inserted ID. So let's say we have a user registered already, which has a user ID of 1, for example. What this function will do is when we insert a new field, which will create a user ID of 2, this MySQL insert ID function returns this number. So whatever their unique user ID is, this will be returned from this function. So we register the user, we return this value, and then we can pick it back up in register.php. So now that we've got this function out of the way and done with, and it will work successfully, hopefully I've written the code correctly, we can actually go ahead and create a variable called register, and that's going to be equal to user underscore register, and we're going to supply the fields that we need here. So the function takes email, name and password. We know that. We can just type in register email, register name and register password. Now what's going to happen is this function is going to run. It's going to insert the email, the name and the password into our database because we've created a query to do so. What it's then going to do is return the user ID, and that is going to be equal, or that is going to be assigned to this register variable. So now register is going to contain the user's ID. Okay, so what we can do then is we can actually automatically log the user in, and if you've looked at sessions you'll understand how they work and why we use them. So I'm going to say $_session, and we call the session user ID. This is the name that we're going to be using throughout, and that's going to be equal to register. Okay, so we're storing the value we get returned here, so the current user's ID, and we're going to store that in this session variable here. What we're then going to do is locate to another page, so we're going to locate to the index page. So we say header location index.php. Now let's go ahead and just run this without actually relocating the user, so we can see the result of this. So I'm just going to echo out $_session user ID. Okay, so what this is actually going to do now is it's going to give me a number, and the number the user's user ID, and then we can match that in the database to see if it's worked, which hopefully it should. So let's go ahead and actually register a user seriously. So Bob at phpacademy.org, name Bob, and I'm just going to give that a password. Now I've just typed password in as a string, so it looks like that. Okay, so I've just typed that into there. When I click register, we're going to call, we're going to validate the fields. We're going to actually call the user register function, register the user with the email, name and password, convert the password, and convert the password here and insert that into the database, as well as the other values, and we're returning the ID, which we're then setting into a session. So as long as you think about it carefully, it will make sense why we do it. We're automatically logging the user in after we register them. Okay, so let's go ahead and actually register our user. We click register. You can see that 9 has been returned. Now if we go ahead to our database and click browse, you can see that this data has now been put into the database. We've got the email as bob at phpacademy.org, the name as Bob, and the converted password here. So the user ID is in fact 9, and that's the value we had returned here. So now we have a session with the value of 9 in, which we can then use when we're performing things like creating albums, uploading images, etc., etc. However, for now what we want to do is relocate the user to the index page. So we can delete this here, and we can say header and then location index.php. We then use exit to ensure that the rest of the page doesn't run.